In most cases here at the Fireside Tales, I don't know the person or the place that these stories occur in. I mean, there have been exceptions. I knew a few of the places that the Thief Prince went, and I actually own the suit of armor that belonged to the king. But, for the most part, I just stay here at the library, working here. But there are a few exceptions to this, and this story is one of those cases. It occurs to one John Basil, who I have actually met. And the first instance we have of John Basil in our records occurs in the small town of Elwood. Now, Elwood was your pretty standard small town. It was a town that didn't like any nonsense, or it didn't like any excitement. In fact, the motto of the town was, "No nonsense allowed." And anyways, the people there were very orderly. They didn't like your button to be in the wrong buttonhole, and they always kept the hair combed straight. And anyways, there was a little jail there known as Elwood Jail. And the sheriff there, Sheriff Stanley, was considered by many to be a very kind-hearted man and also very forgiving. He was always trying to reform the prisoners that came to him, try to teach them good values and teach them a hard work ethic. Anyway, Sheriff Stanley was sitting in his office, doing some paperwork, when his deputy, Deputy Lloyd, came in. Now, Lloyd was a little bit more he was a little bit more eccentric. He had big ideas, I guess you could say. Anyways, he comes bursting through the door and he says, "Sheriff Stanley, I got him. I think he belongs to the mafia or something." And Stanley asked him to calm down and tell him exactly what had happened. And the deputy said, "Well, I got this man off the street. He was trying to break into a car. He says his name is John Basil." Well, anyways, Sheriff Stanley asked the deputy to bring him in, and John Basil seemed like a very polite man, and he also wasn't very pretty to look at. He had long, grangly gray hair, rather greasy, and he had a long face, and he was a little bit overweight. Anyways, he comes walking in, and they do the regular routine, get his fingerprints, and they send him to jail cell number 43. Well, anyway, Sheriff Stanley continued with his paperwork, and he didn't think any more of John Basil. And about 2 weeks went by when the sheriff was sitting in his office when suddenly the deputy burst through the door again, and he said, "He's gone!" And the sheriff said, "What are you talking about?" And Lloyd, he said, "John Basil! He just disappeared from his prison cell! Poof!" Well, anyways, the sheriff and the deputy went to the jail cell to find that, indeed, Basil wasn't there. So anyways, they began to search the town for him, and eventually they found him at the local tavern, and he was drinking a beer at one of the booths. So anyways, they took him back to the cell, and they tried to figure out how it was exactly he escaped, and eventually they figured it out. Apparently he had a duplicate key to the jail cell door, and also he had managed to train a bird to fly down to the windowsill and drop things off for him. Therefore, the bird had the key tied to its leg. Anyways, the sheriff decided that John Basil needed some work to get his mind off things and get his mind off from trying to escape again. And he got him a job as a hair cutter, and for a little while, Basil seemed to enjoy this job. He's always whistling while he worked. And one day, while he was cutting Sheriff Stanley's hair, he said, "You know, this work has really been doing me good. I've been cooped up in that jail cell getting bored all the time, but now I'm able to keep my mind preoccupied. I think this was what I needed, Sheriff Stanley." And Sheriff Stanley really thought that maybe Basil was going to change. Well, he was sitting in his office, Sheriff Stanley, and he was working on some paperwork when the deputy burst through the doors, this time a little bit less surprised. "He disappeared again." Well, anyways, they went on another manhunt for him, and oddly enough, actually, they found him in that same tavern at that very same booth drinking a beer. Well, anyways, they took him back, and they discovered that he had made a rope out of all the hair that he had done from the hair cutting. And he just went down off the second floor. So anyways, they kept him even under higher security now, but by this point a lot of the papers had already got out the word that the man had escaped from the jail twice. And so eventually a bunch of big city people arrived, led by a man by the name of Ray, I think it was. And they just basically said, "You've let this guy escape 2 times now. You guys clearly don't know what you're doing." So they told him that they were going to get him off. They were going to take him themselves. And they also said that they believed that this John Basil might be connected with the mafia, a man by the name of Freddie Malone. And anyways, Ray explained, "We've got a spy to infiltrate Freddie Malone's gang, and we have his name on the list. Well, anyways, Sheriff Stanley wasn't sure about this. John Basil had always seemed like a nice man to him, but then again, they had to admit they didn't know much about him. I mean, they didn't know who his family was. He just came off the street one day. So they gave him Basil, and Basil was sent straight to Alcatraz. And he was there for quite a few months until he finally managed to escape again. It's actually very ingenious how he did, and it's been done before, but it was still very smart that he was able to get away with it. Anyways, he had managed to get one of the people with less security on them to dig a tunnel for him underneath the wall, and then he just went with him and went down through the tunnel and out of Alcatraz. But anyways, the guy that helped him escape didn't get caught, but Basil was actually found on a park bench sitting in the middle of the street, and Alcatraz tried their best to keep this moment hush-hush, thinking that it would never happen again. And it did. John Basil made a glider this time and flew right out of Alcatraz, and again he was caught sitting on a park bench in the middle of the street. And Alcatraz has had to talk to a lot of people to keep this secret. Anyways, John Basil almost began to take on legendary form. He began escaping from prisons left and right, and there was no one who could contain him. Until finally, they got him out in this glass box in the middle of the desert, and they shined lights on him, and they had at least 10 guards with guns standing there watching over him. And eventually, John Basil asked for a cigarette. So one of the men came up, and they kind of was trembling as he handed him the cigarette, and John Basil took it, and he lit it, and he had a little smoke. And then, well, something extraordinary happens. All the things that have happened so far, although they may be absurd, made some sense, you know. They might be absurd explanations, but they were explanations. But what happened here seems almost supernatural, almost as if John Basil becomes the magic of the Fireside Tales. As he was sitting there smoking, all at once all the lights went out, not only in the desert, but out in the city as well. And everyone was running around yelling and screaming, trying to get the lights back on, and finally they succeeded, only to find an empty chair where John Basil had been sitting. And to this day, no one has any idea how Basil managed to escape. It would seem impossible, and even we here at the Fireside Tales have no explanation. But anyways, eventually he was found again, just sitting on a park bench in the street, and they brought him back, and eventually they took him back to Elwood's jail, and that is where he is today. I actually went down to Elwood Jail to visit him, to do a little bit of research, for once. Anyways, I met Basil, and he was a very nice guy. We shook hands. He was always had a smile on his face as he told me stories. And eventually I asked him, "You're not actually planning on escaping from prison again, are you? I mean, this is the end, right?" And John Basil said, "Seth, let me tell you something. I'm about 90 years old now. I'm just not the dashing young man I used to be. I haven't escaped from prison for about 10 years. I think I'm about finished. And you know what? I'd like to get away from this prison for a while and, get myself a family and a little house, maybe. It's just not easy being cooped up in a penitentiary your whole life. It just all goes by. It's like the whole world passes you." Anyways, as he said it, I was touched. I really was. And there were tears streaming out of his eyes. And I left there, and I didn't think much more about him. But anyways, I was sitting in my office in the Fireside Tales and reading the newspaper when Devon came in. And he told me that John Basil had managed to escape again. This time he had pole vaulted over the walls of the prison. And so I think that for the first time ever, I was out Fireside Tales by John Basil, I guess you could say. I consider him a worthy opponent. Because he really did. I mean, honestly, if you had been there, you would have thought the same thing as me, that he had completely changed, I assure you. He is very good. But just incredible. I just don't know. He just seemed like an old man. But John Basil, if you're out there listening, let me tell you that you will always have a place here at the Fireside Tales. And as always, sweet dreams and good night.